Listen to the word of God as found in Genesis chapter 21, verses 8 to 21. You may find it in your Pew Bible, the Old Testament, page 17. So Abraham rose early in the morning and called all his servants and told them all these things. And the men were very much afraid. That isn't right, I'm sorry. I'm on the wrong chapter. I seem to be fouling up a good bit today, don't I? The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son, whom Sarah bore him. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she bore to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she sat down and went away off about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Do not let me look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of the God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness, and he became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Here ends the lesson.
This morning's theme is talking about staying awake to God, keeping our faith alive and relevant in our society. And each generation needs to keep their faith story alive. And throughout the Bible, when the Bible was an open book, when people could add stories that were affecting them to their gospel sacred history, it was a little easier to keep that story alive. I mean, imagine if you were Yakov walking and your neighbor, you're visiting with them, and can you believe what happened to Abraham's son? And, well, you read this story. It would help you understand. And it would help you to make sense out of the things that were happening around us. It is interesting that we're still living some of the history of this story. Of course, the two sons that we're talking about with Abraham, we have the one son, Isaac. We have the other son, Ishmael, who was the son that was sent away. If I were a Muslim studying Islam, I would follow my generations back to Abraham through Ishmael. If I'm Jewish or Christian, I would follow my generations back to Abraham through Isaac. It's important for us to remember at one time we were one family. We see this throughout the Bible as far as having relevant, important information being dealt with, being added to our sacred stories. In fact, we see it right at the very beginning of Genesis. 700 BC, Babylonians came throughout the Jewish homeland, overtook the entire area. The Jewish people were dispersed all over Babylonia and constantly had to deal with Babylonian creation stories that were a mix of chaos and gods and goddesses fighting with one another and killing one another. And in the midst of all that chaos, you had the world kind of created. And in the midst of that, a Jewish rabbi, a Jewish leader, created this gentle satire about the Babylonian creation stories and put it into the context of a lovely poem, 6-day format of creating the earth, and everything was organized with God being the architecture. And it was good. And that story was so important to the people during that exile that it was added to their sacred story. This process continues into the New Testament. When we turn to Matthew, of course, Matthew was written about the year 80, 82, and he's reflecting back on things that happened during the year 2930 with Jesus' life. And so he's writing about Jesus' ministry, the beginnings of the ministry, how it took off and so forth. But there's also in the back of his mind some things that are happening during the year 80. And he's reflecting on those. And we can see some of those issues kind of oozing through some of Matthew's gospel. Such as with Matthew 10. In this context, in the year 30, Matthew is talking about Jesus sending out his disciples, and he's giving the disciples instructions. But in the year 80, we have some issues that are really facing this young Christian movement. One of those issues is they're afraid. They're afraid because in the year 80, it was not a popular thing to be a Christian or to be Jewish. And during the 80s, Christianity was not a separate movement yet. It was still mainly part of the Jewish tradition. So people, yes, in the year 80 would go to house churches, Christian house churches, but the Jewish Christians would also oftentimes go to the synagogue and be a part of the Jewish services. But during the 80s, there were still repercussions from the Jewish rebellion that ended with the Jewish defeat in 70. There was also backlash because part of the official religion of the 80s was that, and this is the 80s, not the 1980s or the 18th, this is the 80s. But part of the official religion of the 80s was worshiping the Roman emperor. He was, according to Roman rules, the Son of God, and you would pray to him. Jews did not do that. Christians did not do that. So it was not a very popular thing among official circles. So people were wondering, how much of my faith can I share? I am afraid of these officials. I'm afraid of being hauled off to jail. What does Matthew put in the words of Jesus that are speaking to the 80s? From Matthew 10. So have no fear of them. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Helping people of his day deal with some of the issues at play. And again, reading on, another issue that was affecting life in the 80s was, the family discord that was happening. It was not an easy task to leave the Jewish tradition religiously. Today, we still see that. If you're Amish and you leave the Amish tradition, you can no longer eat together. I mean, there's certain repercussions of leaving. Multiply that times 10 during the 80s. It was hard for these new Christian believers to tell the family and to have the family accept their new religion. And so what does Matthew include in Matthew 10 concerning that? And again, this is written in 80s, reflecting on, and stay with me on this one, reflecting on the 30s, but what Matthew is writing about is relevant to the issues at hand. Do not think that I've come to bring peace to the earth. For I've come to set man against his father, and daughter against her mother, and daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be members of one's own household. Today we can look back at this and we can say, what is that? But in the 80s, the scripture was salve for a hurting soul. Keeping our faith alive. Every generation needs to be able to have a sacred story that reflects the issues, that reflects the important things that are happening around us. And again, when the Bible was an open book, when we could add to the sacred story as time progressed, it was a little easier for us. But then we decided and we needed to close the book and have it become a canon. In 313, Constantine was trying to make amends with the Christians and wanted to apologize for all the nasty things that happened to them. And so he gave the Christians an official apology, and he also agreed to build 50 churches and to have 50 copies of their Bible printed up, one for each church. Well, you can imagine that all of a sudden creates a little bit of a crisis. We got to have a Bible. And so we had put together, but that was kind of the beginning of making the New Testament a closed canon. So today, as we march forward 1,700 years with a closed canon, how do we continue to have this sacred story speak to us? It's hard. It's very hard. Because now we can't add to. We have to kind of look back at and sometimes interpret what's written and see how it might apply to us today. And frankly, sometimes we get that right and sometimes we get that wrong. Throughout these 1,700 years, we've used the Bible to justify some pretty tragic events. And we don't have to commiserate over this for an extended period of time, but we do have to understand, and I think accept, that we can make mistakes. We've used the Bible to justify all sorts of things. Crusades. It was God's will that we go down through the Crusades and free the area from the Muslims. And it was God's will that the Muslims die. That's what we interpreted at one point in time. We justified slavery. We justified women being second-class citizens. And we constantly have created us and them. We've made some mistakes. We also fought a new movement in the 1500s called this Age of Enlightenment. During that time, some of these intellectuals decided that they were going to just, test every assumption that we've made. The right of kings to rule without being accountable to the people. Is that right? They questioned that. And of course, they questioned a lot of the assumptions that we made from religions. We didn't handle that too well. We basically said, if you rock the boat, you're going to be burned at the stake. And a lot of people were. But throughout that movement, and for the past 200 years, we've had the opportunity to go back and to learn some things that we have lost about our ancient text that's breathing new life into our sacred story. We're not adding to, but we're understanding with more depth and more understanding, deeper understanding. We have the words of Jesus when Jesus said, "Come, follow me. Believe in me." Well, what did he mean with that? Many of us have just assumed that that means, well, if I say yes to a couple of questions, that means that I'm believing in Jesus, and as long as I can say yes to that, I get my diploma, I'm a Christian, and I can go on and live my life any way I want to live it. That's not the way Jesus was really thinking at the time. When Jesus was saying, "Follow me," or "Believe in me," it was much deeper. And we understand this now about ancient religions. In ancient days, religion was hard work. Religion involved a lot of practice. People understood that you don't just learn how to do religious things by reading a book. You got to practice. Kind of like cooking. If I've never cooked anything in my life and I read a couple recipes and then I get in front of a stove, how do you think that's going to turn out the first time I try to make an angel food cake from scratch? Probably not real good. Or how about learning how to drive? You give your teenager the driving book, and they learn all this stuff about, and then you get in the car for the first time. And you get a question like, well, how is it that you know when the car is in the middle of your lane and not like in the middle of the road or something, as a bridge embankment is headed your way? Some activities require practice. And religion is like that. Religion is an activity we got to practice, we got to do, we got to get involved. And when Jesus said in Jesus' day, "Follow me," he is inviting us into a world of practice, into a world of understanding, making mistakes, learning the things that he taught, looking at the parables, reflecting on those, trying to build a deeper understanding of who we are, how we relate to the world as he would. Because as Christians, we're followers of Jesus. We're trying to understand the world through Jesus' eyes. And we're trying to behave and treat other people like Jesus would. It's a very, very active faith. So again, how do we do that today? How do we keep God alive? How do we stay awake to God today? Yes, we want to read. And yes, we want to ask questions. And we want to turn our life over to Christ. Yes, we need to be born again or born from above. But that's the beginning. We need to be born from above, but then we need to grow up in the faith and practice. Couple examples. True story. Not made up. Suppose you're selling a house. Suppose you have a house on the market. You've gone through what everybody goes through. You've lived in this house, 15 years. And of course, there's stuff that you've just never gotten around to do. But now that you're selling the house and you can't enjoy it anymore, you've been busy fixing those things up. So now I guess the next person that comes in can at least enjoy them. So everything is fixed up and you advertise the house, you put it on the market, somebody's interested. Oh, good. Well, they have conversations with you, and what do? They send out their inspector to inspect the house. Okay? And the inspector kind of gives the okay, or sometimes gives a list of some things that are not quite up to snuff. Suppose all that's done, and you're moving towards the closing. And it's only a couple days away. And you're walking through and you shut a door, and all of a sudden the door kind of falls. And it's not supposed to fall. And you look closer, and you can actually pull the door away. And you discover that there's termites in the house that you didn't know about. Well, what do? Closing is just, less than a week away. I mean, their inspector has already been here. It sounds like, let's see, if I'd get a nail gun and a little bit of caulk and maybe some paint, I could, and then I could just practice, what? You found termites? That's option one. Some people I know, though, who were Christian, didn't choose option one. Instead, they got on the phone and they talked to the people who were looking forward to buying their house. And they said, I got bad news. This morning we were walking through, we opened the door, it fell off the hinges, and there's termites in this house. Now, I want you to know, we didn't know that this was here. We will do what we have to do to fix it. We will accept that expense. We have the exterminators coming as we speak. But I want you to know that since the condition of the house has changed, since you started conversations with us, if you want to get out of this agreement, we will allow you to do that. Well, they didn't get out of the agreement. I would guess that they were a little blown away with that level of honesty. But everything turned out okay. But what I love about that story is, A, that level of integrity doesn't just happen. That is practiced, and that is built into our system over time. And it comes from trial and error and times where you let yourself down, and I wish I would have responded a little different. That is built, and that is built on a wonderful foundation of practice, which takes us back to what Jesus was challenging us to do, to practice our faith and build integrity and model me so I can be proud of what I see. There's other examples. Imagine you're going to a restaurant and you're late for your reservation and you're trying to get there, and then you notice someone that needs a little bit of your help. What do? Do you stop and help, or do you you're late for your reservation. They're kind of getting in the way. It's surprising how many people pass on by and don't stop to help. Again, we got to practice our faith, and we got to build that integrity over time. Staying alive to God, staying alive to the challenges of our faith. It's more than just reading. It's more than just knowing that you believe a few statements. It's practicing. May we today invest in our faith and practice and build integrity into our Christian tradition. Amen.